Welcome to the Comstock channel. My name is Brianne Hendrickson. Today I have David with us. Welcome, welcome.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for joining us on this live today. I have you on. We're going to talk all things carbon pipeline. First, just kind of give us your rundown of your involvement in this.
Well, I guess what I'd like to talk about is it's been a controversial issue in many ways, but why there is a actual economic justification for the ag economy for these CO2 pipelines. And we have a problem right now with supply versus demand for corn. And we probably noticed lately that the corn market's been very weak. And that is because this year, despite even the drought, we planted enough acres that we've created a burdensome supply situation. Our carryover has increased nearly 800 million bushel from last year. And as we look ahead into the future, we can become rather concerned if these current trends continue. Pray tell, if we don't have a drought that limits the yield, we can be looking at some really excessive carryovers that are hard to get out of. Doesn't look at this point in time like we're going to get much help on the demand side from the livestock or the feed side. The hog industry is suffering some significant losses. The cattle industry is at a point where they've liquidated a lot of the herd, and it's going to be quite a while before they can switch into an expansion phase before there's no more numbers on feed. And so we're not going to look for a lot of help from that sector. Then we look at exports, and maybe this year we'll have some weather problems in Brazil, but they've been growing their production just like they have their soybeans, and they've been heavy competition. We've struggled on the export side, and exports were dependent on someone else all the time for that demand. That's what is one of the beautiful things about ethanol is domestic. It's all our own decisions, and as I look into the future here, the most logical, significant material increase in demand that we can see on the horizon would be from the ethanol industry. Well, there's a lot of regulatory, hindrances to that. One of them is that markets are limited by products' carbon scores. And maybe we can put up the first slide that I had here. And this is a life cycle of greenhouse gas emissions for gasoline. And it's the red numbers down in the corner that you can imagine that gasoline is a high carbon fuel. Yeah, on the ethanol life cycle, just as the ethanol industry is today, you can see now that number is green over there. It's a significant reduction from what gasoline is. But what we're told is that in order to open up a lot of markets in Japan, in California, in Europe, and even for this sustainable aviation fuel, that we need to get a carbon score that's much nearer zero. Well, how do we go about doing that? Now, that shows the life cycle for the greenhouse gas emissions for ethanol when the CO2 from the process is sequestered. We're down there now where we've basically got a zero carbon fuel. And we can see not millions of bushels increase in corn demand as a result of that, but hundreds of millions of bushels as we look out here. And I don't know anything else that's going to give us, that kind of a growth to corn demand. Our trend line yield on corn, when I started farming, give away my age here a little bit, I was getting 140 bushel per acre. Well, this year I did have a record yield, but the farm did 261. And I would anticipate that those trends are going to continue to grow. And so therefore what we're going to need another significant source of demand to avoid going back into, where we were pre-ethanol, where we have basically very lethargic, terrible, unprofitable corn prices. And then we got to go back to the government or something. That's not a good solution, in my opinion, where we have to go to the government and say, hey, raise all the subsidies again and stuff so we can survive out here. It seems like it makes a lot more sense to do something that is in our capacity to do, which is basically, sequester the CO2, bring down the carbon score of ethanol, which will open up a significant increase in marketability for biofuel, and therefore we can not take government handouts and such here as we get, and we can control our own balance sheet relative to corn, so we can stay away from these tremendously burdensome carryovers. So we're going to look at maybe just a little of the process of what carbon sequestration, what about some of the background logistics that go into it. Essentially, you need two things to be able to sequester carbon. You need to be in an area that doesn't have a lot of seismic activity. You don't want earthquakes and stuff after you've put the stuff in the ground, releasing it again. The other is the proper geology. And there's only a few places in the United States that are really ideal to do this. And there is places in Texas in particular, and then again up in North Dakota. Now you'll notice on this map, there's some places that don't have seismic activity, like Iowa, but Iowa doesn't have the right geology. And so you've got to take the carbon CO2 to these places where you can safely sequester it and keep it where it's supposed to be. This is just a picture of what it looks like, I guess, from a CO2 injection well. They get down through, they go deep with it, and it does have to have the right geology, or that there's a storage formulation or a formation, where they can control that. And they've been doing this for some time. They've been monitoring it all, and I believe that they think that they've got it successfully down now, where there can be some confidence in their ability to do this. As I mentioned, one of the most appropriate locations in the United States to sequester CO2 is in North Dakota. And the North Dakotans, their governor and other ones up there, they understand that more than anybody. Now there's a huge potential up there, more than 100 billion tons of CO2 storage potential, and these things like Summit Carbon Solutions are just a small, minute fraction of that amount is what they're going to take up there at this point in time. And so this is the right direction to take it. As far as the CO2 goes. Now, this is an outline of what the Navigator project looked like. The Navigator project has now been shut down, and there were many good reasons for that. I didn't really think ever that it was going to be successful. One of the problems was that they were taking their CO2 to Illinois, and they never were able to lock down or secure their sequestration site. Another thing that wasn't really so much in Illinois' interest is, if you notice, there was only one ethanol plant they were hooking on to in Illinois. Well, there was a lot of them in Iowa, but I think it's been estimated that a CO2 plant or ethanol plant make another $24-5 million every year from the CO2 sequestration. Well, Illinois only have one plant, well, most of them are in Iowa. And so this project, when they're taking it to Illinois, would mostly benefit Iowa. The other thing was in just the culture of this entity. It didn't connect with farmers. It didn't pay what what I believe that easement should be worth, and so it subsequently failed. And I think I even predicted that at the time that their model was not going to work, and as the way it is. So. Now we're going to look at the Navigator system, and it's quite possible that some of those ethanol plants in Iowa, or that were previously going to hook on to the Navigator pipeline, may end up hooking on to the Summit pipeline. The Summit pipeline is now secured, their CO2 sequestration site in North Dakota. They have 80% now. They announced this week of voluntary easements in North Dakota. They had an issue earlier for getting regulatory approval. They were too close there's a backstory to it, but they had to move a little farther away from Bismarck and go around Bismarck. And they're now been asked, even I think, to reapply, and I think they will get approval there. As far as Iowa is concerned, the IUB, I think, will be making a ruling so shortly after the first of the year. I think they're over like 75% approval right now of voluntary easements, and so this project is, and I think they've had some issues in South Dakota. Initially, were turned down there, but most of the efforts, the roadblocks that have been thrown in front of them, are failing. And I think that if Iowa's IUB approves it, I think South Dakota will eventually do so as well. There's been some county lawsuits that have been attempted to change ordinances and stuff after the fact to try to block, Carbon Summit. So far, I mean, the courts have thrown them out immediately. The situation is, let's say that, okay, you're any company, you're just making a widget, and you're looking at what's the regulatory environment and the rules of operation in the state of Iowa, whatever, for me locating a plant there and making widgets, and then you analyze it all, and gosh, it doesn't seem to be any problem. You've met all the regulations and the conditions, and so therefore you make an application and you begin your project. It doesn't work then after that point for locals to turn around and say, "Oh, we really don't want you here, so now we're gonna basically enact a whole bunch more ordinances or whatever to change things to now block you." And it's not really surprising that the courts have thrown that out, and that is what's happening. And I mean, it's I think there's probably 20. Well, if there's 75% have given voluntary easements, the situation then is there's 25% that haven't. Of that 25%, it's probably 15% of those are just kind of sitting on the side waiting, and there's 10% or so that are really avid opponents to this. And so as I look at, as I explained in the beginning, in the justification of why we need the CO2, we need the basically this corn demand. That's I'm from a marketing background, and I was been in this business long enough that when you go back a number of years before pre-ethanol, and we were hurting. We were taking government subsidies and struggling every year with LDPs and all kinds of scheme and device or whatever to try and make a living. And then we came up with a value-added industry, and I helped organize that at the time, ethanol industry, and did my small contribution to selling that industry. And now it uses 5 billion bushels of corn. It became the third leg under the stool of corn demand, along with feed usage and exports, and it has been the greatest wealth creation for agriculture in my lifetime. Is what it's been. And well, here we are again. And so we have another decisions to make. And it really ultimately, I did examine this, and I give you a little background. You asked maybe when you started about how I got where I got, and we looked at the route, and it was coming across a part of our property, and some of the neighbors there, and so I contacted several, and I ended up with 8 that were kind of invited to a meeting that were relatives and in-laws and even a high school graduate friend, class of 1970, goes back a ways. And we all got together and we talked it over. It says, hey, what do we think of this thing? Should we, are we interested? And then we basically started creating the conditions in which would interest us. What proper compensation would be. How we wanted them to, how deep we wanted the pipe laid, and how we wanted them to handle the dirt, and how we wanted them to maintain the tile. And there was just a myriad of things, and we were concerned about liability and everything. And we made a huge list and at what our criteria was, and for maybe what it would take to get us to be interested in an easement. And then we met with some Carbon Solutions representatives, and I think we were pleasantly surprised, I guess, at how we were treated, and throughout the negotiations, and they essentially mitigated our concerns, and we really believe that we received fair compensation for this easement, and we're looking ahead to the day here where this, as far as I'm concerned, for our current corn demand situation, this can't happen fast enough. We need to get this market open so we can run these ethanol plants closer to full capacity, and so we can add some demand to this corn and keep this carryover from getting out of control. Is where we're at. Every time we put in an ethanol plant, what has happened is historically we've run 30 cent under Chicago bases, 30 or 40 cents here in Northwest Iowa. Well, I just checked here this afternoon, and I think we were 15 cents over, even under current situations. And that's a huge positive contribution to our corn market, and that way. So it's and I think that there's more of that. I think that when they have been, if they run at a higher rate of capacity, they're going to need more corn, and they're going to have to secure that, and so the basis is shown up there. And so in general, that's the overview of how we got to make the decisions that we made and why we made them, and I think the critical point here that we're at in this industry, as I said, I really think that increased ethanol demand is really our only near-term source of corn demand. The sustainable aviation fuel had some good news this last week, where they're going to be evaluated for their carbon score on the GREET system, and that will open that up so that ethanol can be used. The lower carbon score, the better on that. But what is there? I don't know if there's a couple plants that are under construction or whatever. It's going to take a couple years, and I fear what's going to happen in the interim, I guess, as to the corn market relative to that, before we can get this in place, before we can get to this next level of demand. So time will tell.
This is part 1 of a 2-part episode. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok.